Hello, I'm Waqar Rizvi, and this is Scope. In the first segment of today's show, we're going to discuss the Iraqi Prime Minister's visit to the United States and U.S.-Iraq relations, of course, keeping in mind the Iranians as well, considering that was a topic of discussion, at least from the American side, towards the Iraqis during their visit. We know that a huge number of deals have been signed, upwards of $8 to $10 billion is the estimate of energy deals and other such deals signed between the two countries, of course, in favor of the Iraqis at this time, who badly need investment after years of course, of upheaval, of war, etc. But of course, the main issue does remain when it comes to Iraq, the fact that it has become the setting of the rivalry between the United States and Iran, especially in the Middle East region. Let's discuss all of that a bit further. We're now joined by Dr. Bamo Nouri, who is an academic, political analyst, investigative journalist, and expert of the U.S. foreign policy in the Middle East. He's joining us from London. Joining us this morning from Indianapolis, Indiana, is Dr. Hussein Banai, who is an assistant professor of international studies at the Hamilton Lugar School of Global and International Studies at Indiana University. Hussein and Bamo, thank you both for your time today. Bamo, let me start with you. What do you make of the trip to the United States? I mean, Al-Kadhimi is pretty much known as a fairly pro-U.S. Iraqi leader, isn't he?
He is, in comparison to all the other prime ministers and the kind of designate before him, which was Assad al-Idami. It's clear that what Kadhimi is trying to do is, simply put, create a neutralized image of Iraq, decouple Iraq from the position that it was in before in terms of being kind of indirectly yet firmly aligned with Iran in a kind of clouded position in terms of its stance with the US, whereas now Kadhimi is neutralizing from both Iran and the US. And I think what's important in this specific meeting is that it gives Kadhimi some platform to indirectly denounce Iran and also announce Iraq's plans going forward, in terms of that Iraq isn't going to be a battleground for proxy wars and wars between different regional and global powers. And also for Trump, it's important because it's election year, and Iraq will always remain important to Republicans and for Republican loyalists who these contracts are ultimately going to benefit. It's also an important win in that regard, in a very, very difficult year for him as well.
And do you think there are alarm bells going off in Tehran right now when it comes to this meeting, these meetings and these deals? I mean, does this mean that the Iranians are losing their grip over Iraq?
Not necessarily. I think Iran's objectives in Iraq has always been to make sure that its own networks of patronage are well supported from Tehran, and that it does everything it can to maintain its influence with the government in Baghdad. They're always aware of the fact that the Americans are going to play a big role, especially when it comes to Iraq's energy and security sectors. But at the same time, they have to ensure that especially the Shia-dominant political parties and groups still maintain their loyalty to the government in Iran. Look, Iraq's government is a classic case of a semi-dependent government that ultimately lacks the legitimate authority because of this position that it has between the United States and Iran. And with the wave of protests that have been going on the streets in Baghdad over the summer, the government is eager to demonstrate that it can deliver some goods. And obviously this opportunity, as your other guest mentioned, matches up well with the political imperatives of President Trump in the United States right now, and they're taking advantage of it.
I wonder, and a lot of people would say that these sorts of deals, this sort of good relationship with the U.S., as it can be said with the Iranians as well, always comes with strings attached, right? So if you're having all these deals, there's something that the U.S. is getting out of this politically as well. How exactly will the Iraqis be able to balance this? Because, Iran, for all of its problems, is still an important neighbor.
100%. I think one thing is very, very clear is that the way Iraq was dominated and taken advantage of by neighboring regional and global powers can't happen again. These protesters, simply put, aren't going to step aside and compromise with their wants and the way they see Iraq. But one of the ways that Iran was dominating Iraq in a kind of very, very ostentatious way, lacking a lot of humility, was that it would select officials that would basically make decisions in Iraq's economy and market to serve Iranian interests. We know that 80 to 90% of Iraq's population are employed or on civil service salaries. Iraqi citizens would get these wages and buy products that primarily come from Iran in the south and Turkey and Iran in the north of Iraq. So these kind of mechanics and these kind of utensils and roads can't go on the same way, because all they're serving is the elite agendas and those that are in power basically benefiting off this. It's not creating jobs for 70% of Iraqis who are under 30, which is a massive number, remain unemployed, having uncertainty in their employment and relying on what is known as wasta, basically knowing people and nepotism to be employed. The only way they're going to overcome this is they change this order and you create more jobs, improve the private sector. And I think Iraq, as much as US influence is, not welcome in Iraq after its legacy with the Republican War, it's also a welcome opportunity for this private sector to be revitalized and to give 70% of Iraq, which are under 30 years of age, that opportunity to basically earn their own living and secure their future independent of government salaries and the lack of dignity that comes with that.
I wonder your thoughts on this, because, just from my point of view, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but it seems, I find it very hard to believe that the Americans would be this nice to Kadhimi when it comes to these deals and just, the way he was welcomed in the U.S. at the White House, et cetera. If there wasn't that calculation of, okay, if we keep the Iraqis happy, if we have some form of influence that is larger than the Iranians because we can sign all these deals and help it out with its energy sector, that all doesn't have, in fact, to do with the Iranians, right? With having that anti-Iran, if I may say, presence right at the Iranian border.
Oh, that has a lot to do with it. I fully agree with that. I think the timing of this announcement, obviously, is very politically opportune for Trump and his allies as they go into this very difficult re-election year. They have used every opportunity at their disposal to highlight Iranian malign influence in countries neighboring Iran, not just in Iraq. And obviously, Iraq is a place where Trump not only wants to highlight that it is pushing back against Iranian influence, but also that it is decreasing the American military footprint, which is also a major political point that he wants to make at home, that he is the one that is ending American military presence in Iraq, and he's doing it in a way that both Barack Obama and George W. Bush were unable to do, and highlighting Iran as the country that will ultimately pay the price of American economic influence in Iraq, obviously is something that is very important to him and his allies in this election year as well. And the Iranians very well understand this as well. They are very good at reading American political opportunism and biding their time and responding in a way that increases their influence over time. Time and again, we've seen this both in the George W. Bush administration and during the Obama years, that any announcement that on the face of it came at the cost to the Iranian government, in fact, over the long term, the Iranians found a way to use it to their own benefit.
Bob, the final word before I let both of you go. On this issue of troops and the reduction in Iraq, there seems to be some disagreement behind the scenes, at least within the U.S. establishment, right, where Donald Trump is saying this may happen very soon, but then there was no timeline spoken of, at least to the best of my knowledge, during Kadhimi's trip, and even a number of U.S. military officials have said we'll have to wait and see. I'm paraphrasing, of course, what they said about how that may very well occur, but that has been the goal of the Iranians, right, from day one, ever since, of course, especially the assassination of Qasem Soleimani as well. What are your thoughts on that?
I think it's important to listen to what powerful people say, but more importantly, compare what they say with what they actually do. Similar to Trump's praise of Kadhimi in Iraq right now in this latest interview, Obama did the exact same thing with Nouri Maliki in 2011, and this was at a time when Maliki was operating an Iraq that was probably more ruthless to those who went against elite narratives than even Saddam Hussein himself, believe it or not. What this kind of situation is displaying is basically that Iranian influence in the region has increased significantly. As a result of that, and all the other kind of pointless wars, if you like, and foreign policy moves by previous administrations to Trump, US soft power has declined. US is now dealing with not just a regional power and influence in Iran, but also the rise of China as well, which it also has to find a way to combat. So I think when I say all of that, is to say that even though he says he's going to remove the troops, I'm not convinced, because it's such a important geopolitical place, and especially with US corporations coming back into Iraq to fulfill these contracts, and I'm pretty sure these contracts are going to be in the interests of US corporations, where it'll be a case of if we can do the job, we'll do it. If not, we want our money up front, and Iraq will probably pay in that way to serve the US interests in that way. But I think there's a bit more to it than just simply saying we're going to remove the troops from a very, very politically divided region.
Yep, that makes sense. I'll leave it there at that, but we do sincerely appreciate both Bamo and Hussein for their time today, and of course for providing us the context on this trip of Kadhimi to the United States, an extremely important one, certainly for Iraq's energy sector and other such sectors which badly need investment after all these years of war and upheaval, as I said in my intro as well. And nevertheless, there is the huge Iran factor, right? Now, in this program, we've discussed about Iran, in negative terms about how its influence in Iraq plays out negatively on the ground there in many ways. Nevertheless, it's a reality, right? The Iranians are an important neighbor to Iraq. Will Kadhimi be able to balance out the American relationship, the relationship with America, I should say, as well as the Iranians? He did smartly, and to his credit, make his first trip to Iran, in fact, before going to the United States. Is that a sign of where he's seeking to find that balance between the Iranians and the Americans? I mean, of course, the ideal goal is for Iraq to be only and only coming up with independent policies which are not influenced by either the Iranians or the Americans, to only do what is in its national interest, as would be the goal for any other country around the world as well. I'll be back with my next segment after this break. Welcome back, viewers. You're still here on Scope with me, Waqar Rizvi. Now, in this segment, we're going to discuss the United States' attempt to snap back, or to use the snapback mechanism within the JCPOA, the Iran nuclear deal, to bring back UN sanctions against the Islamic Republic of Iran. As was expected, of course, the Europeans, the Chinese, the Russians, none of them budged on their respective positions, that it was the U.S. itself, which is, again, fact, that it walked away from the deal on its own, and that it cannot then use the deal to its own political advantage at the United Nations, understandably. And as we can see from the U.S. point of view, they're quite angry about the situation. Pompeo saying that the Europeans are siding with the Ayatollahs, making such statements at this point in time, saying that the U.S. will lead, that it is the other countries which are bowing in some way to Iran, and not again taking into consideration the fact that it can't consider itself a party to this deal if it's walked away from it independently, which is the argument, again, as I said, the Europeans, the Chinese, the Russians are making at this point in time when it comes to the U.S. involvement in the JCPOA. Let's discuss all of that a bit further. We're now joined by Dr. Tereza Novotna, who is a Senior Associate Research Fellow at European, which is a Prague-based think tank, and is a Mary Curie Fellow at Freie University in Berlin. She's joining us now from Berlin itself. Joining us from the Iranian capital, Tehran, is Hamidreza Gholamzadeh, who is a foreign policy expert. Tereza and Hamidreza, thank you both for your time today. Tereza, let me start with you. Give us the European angle on all this, right? I mean, it seems pretty straightforward that the Europeans have said to the Americans, listen, you can't use the snapback because you're essentially not a party to this deal anymore. Is that your reading of this as well?
Hello, everyone. Yes, I think you hit the nail on the head. Basically, the Europeans were trying to save the JCPOA, which is the official title for the Iran deal, since the very beginning, since the United States withdrew on 8th May 2018. And they've been trying to convince the US to go back to the deal. And now, from the European perspective, the US is trying to go back to the deal which it has withdrew from. So Europeans are basically saying, well, too bad you withdrew from the deal, so you can't use provisions of that deal to basically conduct policies that you want.
Hamidreza, in the reaction in Iran, I mean, I imagine that the Iranians, for Iran, nothing really changes, right? I mean, this would have been a lot worse had the snapback worked, but now that it hasn't worked, it still doesn't change the reality of the fact that we're sort of in this stalemate situation when it comes to the deal.
What the JCPOA has had for Iran is that politically it has proved to the world that Iran is the party that is working politically correct, and it has not been actually pursuing any nuclear weapon or something like that was claimed by the other parties, and that it is fulfilling it. So that is the only outcome that the JCPOA has had for Iran, because it didn't benefit from the economic, let's say, ease of sanctions, such things that was supposed to follow the JCPOA. And after that, the United States withdrew from the JCPOA. It didn't happen anything more. So it's not going to be very difficult for Iran or different for Iran in the case of either the procedure goes on or not. But the point is that what is important for Iran is that whether the UN Security Council is going to respect its own resolution, or it's going to actually sell itself to the bullying of the United States. That's the point inside Iran that they're looking at. Iran has been following everything that it needed to do, and it has also warned the United Nations Secretary General, the Security Council, and all the other parties to the JCPOA that they need to protect the JCPOA. And if there is going to be any snapback as called, or if the United States is going to be successful in returning the sanctions against Iran, then there would be no reason for Iran to stay in the deal. So that would lead automatically, I guess, to let's say, killing the deal by the other side, actually.
Tereza, there's no secret, right, that right now relations between Europe and the United States are not very good, especially since Donald Trump came into office, especially if we can with Germany because of the decision right now about NATO troops, et cetera, all of the above. I wonder, though, how much more can Europe really stand up for itself in the face of the United States? Or do you think Europe has made a very conscious decision to say, listen, we're now going to make independent policies and we're not going to base it upon just what the United States says?
Yes, well, when it comes to the United States, to some extent, I think the Europeans will try to wait for the results of the US elections, which are coming up in November. And obviously, I think most of the Europeans are hoping that it's going to be Joe Biden who's going to get elected and not Donald Trump who would get reelected. So to some extent, there will be a strategy to sort of not to make long-term decisions at the moment, but to sort of wait and see. On the other hand, when it comes to Iran deal, I think the Europeans were pretty clear since the very beginning that this is not just about Iran, but it's also about basically upholding the multilateral global order. And that Iran deal is one of the agreements that it's sort of the basis for this multilateralism around the world. We could have other examples: Paris Climate Accord, all the non-proliferation treaties, and so on. So for the Europeans, the Iran deal is not just a question of Iran, but it's also the question of the broader picture of the whole system, which unfortunately has been eroding since Donald Trump has been in power.
Yeah. I mean, I wonder from day one, actually not from day one, but for a while now, there has been a lot of criticism from Iranian officials towards the Europeans, right? I mean, of course, ever since the U.S. walked away from the deal itself, because the criticism has been, as you well know, that the Europeans are not doing enough to save the deal. In fact, there was Instex, and then I believe there's been this recent humanitarian aid given by the Swiss as well. Is all of the above enough to keep the Iranians happy?
Of course not. From day one, actually, it was. You corrected yourself, but it was from day one that the European side didn't do anything. They did nothing to actually help Iran enjoy the benefits that it was supposed to enjoy within the deal. And they, even during President Obama, when he did not ease the banking transactions and he had still impeding that, the Europeans did not protest against that, did not oppose that. And after, during the last more than 2 years now that President Trump has withdrawn from the deal, the Europeans didn't do anything. For the whole first year, the Europeans did not do anything. It was just words and saying that we are going to do something. And as soon as Iran took the first step in retaliation to the lack of performance by the other parties, then the Europeans took some very, very minor steps. And even now, we didn't have anything serious about that. We had just 2 times, if I'm not wrong, and it was because of the coronavirus crisis. And what they gave us was some sort of medicine that is supposedly not under the sanctions as the Europeans and the Americans are claiming. So what the situation is here now is that Iran is not saying that the Europeans are doing anything to actually implement the deal as it was supposed to. But what we understand here in Iran is that the Europeans are trying to keep the deal because they need to have the monitoring on the Iran, the inspection and such things that the IAEA is doing on Iranian nuclear program. And they have the chance, actually, to some extent, to play internationally, to play a role in the global politics. Yep. And that is actually one of the other criticisms that the Iranians have toward the Europeans, that they are not doing what they are expected to do. Actually, they are supposedly independent countries, sovereign states, and they need to act just like sovereign states, not following blind spot the Americans, whatever they do.
Tereza, I don't want to put you on the spot as just somebody who's defending Europe or speaking on behalf of all these European nations, but nevertheless, what is your point of view on what Hamidreza there said? Because that also seems to be quite a legitimate concern, right? Where there were promises made within this deal about what Iran would get out of the deal, and the fact that the Europeans are the main ones right now in the deal, as well as the Chinese and the Russians at this point in time. Have all of the above, especially Europe, done enough, in your opinion, to save the deal at this time?
Yes. The Europeans are also obviously trying to make sure that everyone is in compliance. So the Europeans were also pushing Iran to stick to the levels of nuclear enrichment, which has at the moment been beyond the agreed level. So the Europeans are trying to convince Iran to kind of come back to the initial plans. There has been a dispute resolution mechanism invoked on both sides, so both Iran and the Europeans, and that's the procedure that should be first in place when there are some disagreements. Question whether the Europeans have done enough. It's a good one. Obviously, our colleague was talking about what Iran has been expecting, and obviously Iran hasn't delivered what it wanted. But at the same time, I would say, under the current circumstances, it's probably as best as the Europeans could have done. You mentioned Instex before. That's a very interesting mechanism. It's quite new. There has been some attempts. The Instex mechanism has been launched. There has been some transactions going on, not just between the Europeans and Iran, but also third parties would like to join. And it's basically a system to avoid secondary impacts of US sanctions. So you could trade outside of the sort of the dollar system. And this is a very novel thing that hasn't been done before. And okay, it's not, as good as it could be, but given the novelty and given the fact that it had to be put in place from the scratch, it's the move in the right direction.
Okay.
I think the best hope at the moment is really that neither Iran nor anyone else will sort of continue invalidating the Iran deal, and we will really wait until November and hope that the new administration will sort of go back to the deal, which doesn't mean that then the deal can't be improved, but basically when it comes to nuclear issue, is the best tool we have at the moment. And maybe if I can make one more comment. In a way, the Iran deal could serve as a model for other issues as well. So, there's been lots of discussions what to do about the nuclearization of the Korean Peninsula. Iran deal is to some extent a model agreement that could work in other cases as well. Okay. Especially because it's sort of surviving the fact that the US has pulled out. So in a way, because of that, it's even better example of sort of multilateral international agreement that can survive despite the fact that the US gone out.
Right. Okay, we'll have to leave this word as the clock has gotten the best of us. We appreciate both Tereza and Hamidreza for giving us their viewpoints on this. Tereza speaking to us there from Berlin and Hamidreza from Tehran. There is disagreement, certainly, between the Iranians and the Europeans about the implementation of the nuclear deal. That's happened, as Hamidreza there said, from day one or from right after as the U.S. walked away from the deal. Nevertheless, this also is interesting, the entire deal, because of the gap now that is growing increasingly between the Europeans and the Americans over the deal as well, and for the Europeans' attempt to want to save the deal. But at the same time, when it comes down to the nitty-gritty details of the deal, have the Iranians really enjoyed the benefits that were promised within it, even from day one? And the answer, if we're completely objectively honest, is no. Now, of course, the reasons for that are something that is being debated at this point in time. The Iranians have slowly started walking away from the deal in the sense of they've taken steps which they had promised not to take because, again, they have not enjoyed the benefits from the deal. So there's a back and forth about that entire thing. But it seems at this point in time, the Europeans want to save the deal because they want to have the ability to be able to inspect Iranian sites. Is that enough? Will the Iranians remain forever in such a deal, just again, for the sake of allowing the Europeans to continue to inspect but not gain any benefits from it? That seems like an odd marriage, if we're completely honest. I'll be back with my final segment after this break. Welcome back, viewers. You're still here in Scope with me, Waqar Rizvi. In this final segment of today's show, we're going to discuss Alexei Navalny, who is a Russian opposition leader who has now fallen sick, is in coma as we're speaking. He has now been transferred from a Siberian hospital to Germany on an air ambulance. That, of course, came after some pressure by international governments, as well as, of course, from Navalny's own party, his wife, his family, etc. Now, he fell sick mid-flight. The accusation against the Russian government and the Kremlin is that they poisoned him while he was on the ground before that flight, before getting onto that flight, that is. Is that true or not? I mean, while he was still in Omsk hospital in Siberia there, doctors said there were no traces of poison found. Now, the accusation, again, about that situation is that there was a delay in transferring him outside the country because they wanted those toxins to leave his body. Now, all of this is important because there is a track record of allegations against the Russian government for poisoning respective political opponents. Now, is that what's happened here? Again, those previous times have not always been proven outright. And that's something, of course, to keep in mind as we discuss this with our guests who are joining us now. Joining us from Moscow is Stanislav Mitrakhovich, who is a political analyst and teaches at the Financial University under the government of the Russian Federation. Joining us from Perm in Russia is Pavel Luzin, who is a PhD in international relations. He's an expert in Russia's foreign policy and defense. Pavel and Stanislav, thank you both for your time today. Stanislav, let me start with you. What do you make of the case of Alexei Navalny? Do you believe that he may have been poisoned?
We should wait till German doctors say at least something about this from medical and scientific perspective, if we can say so. Concerning my own point of view about Alexei Navalny, well, we can't say exactly why this happened with him. You know, he served as a, I would say, informant or referral agent, as an institute of internal struggle between groups of Russian elite. His anti-corruption investigations were only possible if he could get access to very specific information, and only one part of elite could give him this information against another part of elite. So I think he is important not only as a person who strikes against Kremlin, against Putin. He is an institute of, I would say, intra-elite communication in Russia. That's why maybe some people who used him to fight in other groups in Russian elite, for example, one company against another company, maybe they were responsible for this specific event of poisoning or alleged poisoning. So first of all, we should listen to German doctors, and then we should see maybe how if he survives, as I hope, maybe his behavior could change. Maybe he could tell us something about ways how he could gather information against Gazprom, against, for example, other companies.
Pavel, what are your thoughts? Do you think that it is too early to point the finger immediately at the Kremlin, that possibly Alexei Navalny had many other enemies that he made?
No, I presume that he has been poisoned by someone in Kremlin. I'm not sure that it was a direct order made by Vladimir Putin, because Vladimir Putin doesn't like to take a responsibility for such an order. But someone from Putin's inner circle, definitely, because this person or group of persons should be powerful enough, should have an access to law enforcement services, to poisons, and so on and so on. And my main question is why they did this. Because there are some reasons when you are inside of Kremlin, and maybe this someone or this group of people tries to increase its power inside Kremlin, but I'm not sure what's about reasons. But definitely I'm sure that it was someone from Putin's inner circle.
Stanislav, a lot of us, again, outside the country, just looking in, would look at the track record, right? Would look at the recent history about poisonings of Russian opposition leaders or activists, etc. What are your thoughts about that? Because this seems to follow a track record of allegations of what has happened to a significant number of people.
Yes, allegations took place, but still, I would say that there are speculations what really happened to these people, because different analysts and different people inside Russia have different views of what happened with, for example, with Nemtsov. He was shot near Kremlin, but no one really knows who ordered this assassination to be taken, because, we didn't hear any reasonable explanation why, for example, Putin needed this shooting of Nemtsov. Why really Putin had a need to do it. As for now, I really think that Putin himself doesn't have any need to kill Navalny. This is a reputational risk for the regime itself. As you said, there is a track of such events that definitely harm Putin more than they harm opposition. And as for Anna Politkovskaya, who was a famous journalist, and she was killed by Chechen insurgents, basically the people who she protected So, but they turned in the end they turned against herself. So it was not a regime action, I would say. As for Navalny, I do believe that he serves as a kind of institute of struggle between different groups of elites, maybe different groups of people who are inside Putin's inner circle. People who are connected to Gazprom can fight people who are connected with Rosneft. People who are connected with Rosneft can fight other people who are connected to Rostec company, and so on and so forth. And some of them definitely gave information to Navalny to fight each other. Well, if you have a country with strong formal institutions of competition like political parties, independent media and so on, independent court system, law system, in this way you can fight through this institute. If you do not have strong parties and institutes, you fight with informal ways. For example, trying to get some specific information against your counterparts through Navalny. You see, so he was important for them. Maybe some of them decided that he knows too much now, and they should stop this cooperation between him and the people inside Putin Soviet and Navalny. It's one of the reasons why this could happen.
Pavel, you know, I wonder if this time was different from previous times where we've had such allegations of poisonings by the Kremlin, right? At least that's what's said, right? So do you think the credit to the Kremlin and the Russian government that it came out pretty much soon after Navalny was hospitalized there in Siberia and said that, listen, at this point in time, there hasn't been poison found, but we are doing an investigation. I mean, just that statement where there wasn't an immediate denial of what may or may not have happened, in the sense they were depending more on doctors' words, does that show that maybe even the Kremlin realizes that this sort of bad PR cannot continue to work?
You know, when someone inside Kremlin decides to act in such a way, like poisoning, like assassination, or something like that, they don't care about reputation, about Russia's foreign reputation, about Kremlin's reputation inside Russia, because they just want to achieve their tactical purposes. And they don't care about reputation. When Russian military intelligence poisoned Skripals in London, in Great Britain, who cared about Russia's reputation? When, I don't know, someone in Kremlin ordered to send anti-aircraft missiles to Ukraine and shut down Malaysian Boeing, who cared about Russia's reputation? No one cared about this, and currently no one cares about Russia's reputation, because these people care only about themselves, only about their power, their wellness, their security, safety, and so on and so on. It's my personal opinion, for sure.
All right, well, we'll have to leave those on the word, but we do sincerely appreciate both Pavel and Stanislav for their points of view, of course, and for bringing, shedding light upon the issues that may have contributed to Navalny and his possible poisoning again. We don't know that for sure right now. As Stanislav there said, it's too early to at this point in time, make a judgment. We will have to wait and see how German doctors see his situation, how they assess him now that he is in Berlin at that hospital, Charité. Nevertheless, as I'd put to both of our guests, this is on a long track record of such allegations of poisoning, of targeting of Russian political activists, opposition activists, that is. But then what does the Kremlin gain from this? As Stanislav there said, we already know that the Kremlin has a bad reputation in this regard. Or is it, as Pavel there said, that no one really cares? Whoever may have ordered such an assassination attempt, or just assassination, really doesn't really care about the Russian reputation around the world. Is that realistic, though, at this time where Putin, we know, is under a lot of political pressure, even domestically, because of his handling of both the economy as well as, of course, the pandemic? Again, there's a myriad of issues here, and it's important to discuss these things outright in the open. I'll leave it there for now. I've been Waqar Rizvi. Thanks for watching.